everyone. I hope y'all have a very good day today. This is a session that I think we all deal with. We deal with student apathy, lack of motivation. How do we deal with it? What do we do in our classrooms in order to make students want to come to class and enjoy the course? So I sent y'all a set of slides already. You should have had that in your inbox about half an hour ago. What we'll be looking at today is what is the situation, what are we dealing with, who our students are, and that may include many of y'all. Many of y'all may be coming from the digital generation Gen Z group, which I'll talk about, and then what is causing this apathy, this loss of motivation, and what we can do about it. So rethinking your teaching, recommendations and techniques and things that I do that I can show you, and some other really useful resources. So lots that I want to go over today. But I also want to hear from you throughout the session. So always feel free to put something into the chat, a comment, I will refer to it. So let me hear from y'all. What kind of situations are you dealing with right now, or perhaps are worried about if you haven't started teaching yet, perhaps from your own experiences? What student behaviors are you experiencing in your classes? Let me hear what y'all have been experiencing and seeing, maybe among your colleagues as well. Lack of engagement in classroom activities. Sleepy in the classroom, yes. Student stress is causing really good students to ask for reduction in requirements. That's really interesting. Not wanting to pay attention to lectures and prefer to be on the laptop or the phone, yes. Lack of interest in lectures. Students not reading, not fully reading directions on assignments. What can we do about that? We're going to talk about all of these things today because they are all, of course, related, but all touch on important aspects of this situation. So what I want to do is kind of approach what y'all just talked about and let y'all see that there's a couple of different things going on. We're dealing with apathy. And apathy really is both a feeling of the students, but also an attitude that they're bringing. And so you may yourself have apathy towards certain things, something that's just particularly not worth it, no longer believing that there's intrinsic value in what it is that they're doing. I'm mentioning here not following the lecture, perhaps they don't see that there's value in what they're seeing, even though it's a course that they're taking, or there's actually a loss of faith in their ability to achieve what they want. And we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. Also, just general disengagement, withdrawing from involvement in activities, particular situations, just not engaging with other students in the classroom, and then the lack of motivation. So you see that those reasons behind wanting to do things, that desire to do something or achieve something in class, it's just really lacking. So these are they seem very similar, but they are actually three different things going on in class. And so what we're going to look at today is the why behind that, and then the what we can do about it. Let's first, though, correct a few very commonly mistaken beliefs. Some of these I had thought originally whenever I first started teaching. Disengagement, distraction is not new. I think we all are of the mindset where, and I know I've been getting worse over time as I've gotten older, things distract me very easily. Those pretty sparkly shiny things are very distracting. So biology has shown us the human mind has always been distractible. So external intrusions, worries, thinking about what you need to put on that list, grocery store, all of those types of things. But the thing is that our mind also is very good at focusing on something important, maintaining that attention in the right circumstances. And that's what you're going to be doing in your classroom, is making sure those right circumstances are present. The issue, however, is that we have, as someone mentioned, technology that has been very well strategically developed with algorithms to make sure that it distracts you and keeps you distracted on those particular apps and websites. So that is very much a heightened challenge that we're experiencing right now. But the thing is that our students that we have now are very different. I am 50 years old. I've been teaching for 25 years. I know many of y'all have been teaching for a long time. Some of y'all, this is your first semester teaching. So this is kind of a 2-for-1 of what it is that you might be doing and what it is you need to look for in your students in the classroom. Our students are different, not just from 20 years ago, but different from 3 years ago. And we're going to talk about that. So what I want you to see is that there is a misconception about the fact that students have and adults have attention spans of 10 to 15 minutes. How many of y'all have heard of that? You can raise your hand. You can just say yes in the chat. 10 to 15 minutes. Maybe you've heard of another time frame. If you've heard of any other time frames of attention spans, put that into the chat. Yeah, I used to teach, when I teach my graduate TAs, that this is a pretty common thing that people know about. Their age represents the time frame that they have attention spans. So what's interesting about this, I came across an article that actually went back and looked at the research about whether that was real or not. And it turns out, well, not so much. So that research on this attention span is very unreliable. There are a lot of methodology issues, a lot of people repeating what they heard in other articles that were actually not true research methodology articles, but sort of review articles. Specifically, that 10 to 15 minutes one comes from this 1978 article that was a literature review of student note-taking and their attention span. So it didn't even have anything to do with paying attention to the lecture, but when students stopped and started taking notes. And there's a whole bunch of other issues that could be playing into that. So that is the fundamental basis of where this 10 to 15 minutes is coming from. And it's not an actual research article. And there was some other research that mentioned that students were observed with having their attention drift after about 10 to 15 minutes. This research that was done was observational research. There was one observer for about 80% of the time, sometimes two, but mostly one, and they didn't define what attention was. So it really had a lot of methodology problems with it. So it really can't be assumed to be something that's representative. There was another article that came out that talked about losing their attention was really more to all these extrinsic pressures. So they were noting when a student looked at their phone or when a student looked at the clock, but they didn't actually assess in the students themselves what was it that was causing them to have attention deficit. Was it, the interest in the class? Was it fatigue issues? Was it anxiety issues? And so there was a lot that was not actually looked at in that study. And then there was another study that showed that even between students that are in a lecture of 15 minutes versus 40 minutes, some articles say that perhaps you lose attention and participation in a longer lecture, but this one showed that there was a decrease, but no one can replicate that actual result. So it's also, again, unreliable with respect to attention spans and what's going on in class. That there was another one even that looked at med students, and it showed that medical students who had a better professor, a more engaging professor, had better attention spans than those that did not. So lots of little things going on in that research that has been parroted as this is the case, this is the truth, this is what we know. Of course, there's a lot more nuance to it. So let's look first at our students. Who are our students? Where are they coming from? What are they dealing with? And this is what I was talking about with respect to the edits that I made this morning that I'm really excited about. So there are what we call the Gen Z, the digital natives, which I think the majority of our graduate students here probably are this. I'm Gen X myself. Gen Z, digital natives, have always been integrated digitally into everything that they do. And just coming from someone from Gen X, where I went outside and played and came home when it got dark, it's really amazing to think about that. It's a completely different mindset than where I'm coming from. But for those of you who are Gen Z, digital natives, you have always had ebooks. You have always had films on the internet distributed that way. You have always had what we call a peer-to-peer economy, sharing economy, where you have this collaborative consumption. You have other people helping you, giving you, lifts, Airbnb, eBay, where it's not a company, it's actually another person that you have this peer-to-peer economy, which I think is really cool. Wikipedia is the Encyclopedia Britannica. It is. It has always existed. It has always been a reference material that has been used, relied on. And students may have never been inside a bank, may have never written a check. I saw a reel the other day of a student, her mother asked her, sharing with her dad what happened at a bank, and the student, they asked me for my social. I'm not going to give them my Instagram handle. I'm like, oh my God. But I don't even think about, that's a completely different perspective because of what they have grown up with and what they're accustomed to. So the new generation, this is that new thing that I came across today. This was an article, actually was mentioned in the Chronicle this morning, but it referred to a group that looks at recruitment trends across time. And they came out with this new white paper, basically, that talks about the fact that this new generation that's coming up is now what they call Gen P, basically class of 2026 and later. So what do y'all think the P stands for? Kind of obvious, but I want to see what y'all think. Gen P. And I think it's not just undergraduate class of 2026, but also graduate as well. Pandemic. And so what they're seeing is that students who are going to college now, are in college now, have been significantly influenced to the point that it is a new generation, have been influenced by those experiences during the pandemic. And I'll get into some details in just a second. But they're coming in academically unprepared, still though having these really high standards for having the digital experience, which is what they've always had, and coming into an environment where it's not the case necessarily. They're questioning the value of a college education. You may have seen some of those blogs and articles online about how students don't see that there's value in a college degree anymore. What they're seeing it as instead is getting those badges, those certificates, that transactional practical view. What can I get for my money? What credentials can I have for my job so that I can live a better life? All very valid reasons, but it's different from what we have had in the past with respect to why people go to college, what they want to do. So it is a completely different mindset from what it has been, and how they're seeing college is very much this neat quote that I came across: pursuit of earning rather than the process of learning. And I think that's an interesting dichotomy in that you can have both, but the students that we have coming in now don't see it that way because they've never had themselves being pushed in that pursuit of learning that we try and have them do here at the university. Now, this is an old quote, but I liked it because it is so appropriate of students. Today, students think and process information fundamentally different from their predecessors. This was said in 2001. It was for Gen Y, for Gen X, or it could be for the baby boomers generation, all being as a result of being exposed to technology from birth. It is a different way of thinking, a different wiring of your brain, if you want to think of it that way. And what we're offering them in university, in higher education, is not aligned with their current lived experiences, what they're dealing with, the moment that we're in. And that's where this mindset of us as instructors needs to shift. And we're going to talk about how to do that and why that's so important. So let me ask y'all, what do you think is causing right now student apathy, student disengagement, lack of motivation? On all the research I've done, I've been able to kind of categorize them into 3 different areas. So let me ask you what you see as kind of the biggest cause or impact on student engagement, motivation, and apathy. So just list 1 or 2. It doesn't have to be from all 3 categories. Real life value, don't see it. Yes, parenting, external environmental issues, strict due dates, not used to having that. Yeah, fear of engaging in civil discourse, jobs, family, sleep, all of that. So many little things are contributing and can contribute to this disengagement, this lack of motivation, this apathy. It almost feels as us as instructors as overwhelming. How do we deal with this? So my idea is understanding the problem, knowing what the challenge is, helps you to be able to implement solutions and things that will improve the situation. So let's look at what the research and what the articles have talked about with respect to what is it that is affecting. Y'all touched on some really big ones here. So just exhausted. I know that I'm exhausted. I know my students are. Anxiety about the future, pandemic related trauma, stress, fixed versus growth mindset. Can't do it, so I'm not going to even try. They're not college material, perhaps. And then extrinsic pressures. Again, y'all mentioned this, your family, your job, things that are controlling whether or not you are able to do what you need to do. So those are related to themselves internally, related to the course and to academia. The relevance. Is it a required course or not? Whether they want to take it or not, because it's not in their major, it's still required. It's a Carolina core. Attitude towards learning. Do they know what it takes and how to learn? That's a huge part of this. And I'll touch on this in a little bit as well. Classroom experience, knowing why it's important to attend class, what they get out of class when they've come from the pandemic where they could just be remote the entire time and thinking that that's what class is like, not having that experience. Perhaps the course material is too challenging or it's too simple for them, so they're disengaging from the course. And then related to their environment, technology, of course, multitasking, y'all. So also housing insecurity, students who don't even have a dorm room, they're living on a friend's couch. Food insecurity, they don't have enough money to buy a meal plan. These are all external pressures. A bad home environment where they're not comfortable being at home for whatever reason it is. So all of these things are impacting how they're interacting with you in class, how they are engaging with the material. And there's so many things here. It feels like, as I mentioned earlier, it's almost too much to get a handle on. But a lot of what we're going to talk about can encompass a large amount of managing these. So that's what we're going to look at in just a little bit. So I want to reinforce the fact that the pandemic and technology have absolutely caused generational change. And I like that phrase, generational change, because you think about the generations of students, but it is a much more bigger picture word, generational change in our society. Education is now very, very different, and our students are very different. So as y'all have just said, they are less invested in the class, less engaged in their learning. They don't know how to learn. They don't know what it takes to learn. Perhaps they have a lost sense of connection with what it means to be a college student, that college experience. Why am I attending? They're not bringing with them skills that many of us expect them to have brought with them, that we took for granted before the pandemic because they were remote the whole time. So those actual hands-on skills weren't provided for them for obvious reasons. And then, as y'all all said, greater anxiety, fear of failure, loss of confidence in their self, in their future. It's just thinking about the fact that, there's wars going on, there's a pandemic, there's all the political issues that someone mentioned, but then we also have the whole overhanging climate issues going on. Just, it's overwhelming I think, for anyone, but students realizing that this is their future coming through the university. What's the point? Exactly, what's the point is what they're thinking. So loss of hope for the future. And so many of these have been around for a while, of course. It's kind of the part of growing up and adulting and learning how to make your way in the world. But the pandemic has absolutely accelerated some of those long-term trends that we've been seeing. All right, I want to touch on, because some of y'all mentioned this as well, while we were in the pandemic, there were some behaviors, conditioned behaviors, learned behaviors, bad habits that were developed on Zoom that your students are bringing with you that tie in directly to this apathy and this disengagement that we're seeing. So students are used to being on other devices. So one article I read talked about how they're treating lectures as a podcast that they listen to while they're doing other things. And I see that a lot in my classroom because they think they can multitask. They expect that there's availability of class recordings when there's not. And so they're just surprised when they can't go back and listen to the recording. Even if they said that they would, they may not anyway. The atrophy of student study skills. They haven't learned how to study in this new environment when they're actually being asked to take an in-class test or do a particular type of project or assignment that they've never had the experience to do in the first place. As one of y'all mentioned, in the pandemic, workloads were lighter, deadlines were fluid usually, and so now they're coming into the environment where this is very different and they don't know how to handle it yet because they've not been shown and educated as to this is how you manage your time. This is how you make sure that you keep on task. And so these are skills that we need to teach our students now. Students are expecting when they re-entered college more of the same, and they didn't really recognize that there are consequences to these actions or inactions, actually missing class and deadlines and study skills, that there are consequences to that, and this is what happens. And so what we see is that we have low motivation, we have avoidance mechanisms. Students are missing class or skipping class. They're not turning in assignments. They're basically not assuming that there are going to be consequences. Can I turn in all of my work at the end of the semester? Well, I did it, even though I didn't make any of the deadlines. I've heard many stories like that. And so this is all combining together to really impact how students are engaging with you, with other classes, with other students as they go through their university experience. So what I want to do is, based on kind of what we've talked about, and now how can we take that information and start thinking about how to make changes in our classroom. What I want y'all to think about, and some of y'all are probably quite well versed in this, is that in order to engage your students, motivate your students, recognize that there are two general types of motivation. There's what we call intrinsic, which is internal to yourself. There's a desire to learn due to your inherent internal interests, sense of relevance, self-fulfillment, mastery, feeling valued, and having a sense of belonging. That is so important. I'm going to be talking about that. Meaning to it, self-knowledge, just wanting to learn that topic. What then would be an extrinsic, where you're motivated to do something by something making you be motivated to do it or making you do something. Grades, rewards, yes, costs, financial, parental expectations, performance, role model comparisons. It's a funny story. I became interested in biology because I have a twin brother and he was interested in biology. So I was like, well, if he can do it, I can do it. But you have to realize that those are both out there coming into play into what's going on in your student and therefore in the classroom. So another way to look at these is that intrinsic is that growth mindset of learning for the joy to learn. And extrinsic is a fixed mindset. Let me do what I need to do and I'm done, basically. So you really want to do things in your classroom that encourage that growth mindset. It's really interesting to, when you think about this and you think about things that you have to do, like laundry or walking the dog. I have done this recently where, what is my motivator for walking my dog? I'm tired at the end of the day. I don't want to get out. My motivator, which used to be extrinsic, was so she calms down. But now it's intrinsic. I love to see how happy she is. And so that now I see is more intrinsic to walking the dog, making sure I give her that experience. When we're talking about motivation, I think also, in addition to what those are, recognize that intrinsic motivation can take time to make those behaviors you want to see come about. It may take time for students to get used to the situation, become comfortable in the classroom, but what you're doing will bring about that intrinsic motivation. And as one of y'all mentioned, a couple of y'all mentioned, it's impacted by whether they think they can do it or not. There's what we call their self-efficacy. Are they capable of achieving the goal? And if you want to think about it right now, you can have a huge impact on their opinion of their self-efficacy. Whereas extrinsic motivation, yes, it produces that behavior, but there's less connection, there's less follow-up, follow-through. They forget it at the end of the semester, and it becomes a reward versus punishment type of feedback. There was a really cool article that talked about, yes, here we have the experience of, carrots versus sticks. Do we want to give them carrots? Do we want to give them sticks? Those are still all kind of extrinsic. Let's think about the intrinsic perspective. That's the chocolate. Let's give them chocolate instead of carrots or sticks, because chocolate has a lot of value to it. Also, keep in mind that intrinsic motivation is absolutely innate. There's a woman, Dr. Carol Dweck, who does research on this. She has this really cool book that has various essays on this. If this is something that interests you, that's an awesome book. And she has other articles as well. But she talks about in this, and there's research about this, that there is absolutely no relationship, statistically or otherwise, between students' abilities and their intelligence and the development of intrinsic motivation. And I think that's so important to think about, whether or not they can or cannot master material. And so it says, even if the student gives a wrong answer, provide positive emphasis for trying and connecting their errors to the correct solution. Absolutely. Just that motivation of, you have the right idea. Let's talk about where there perhaps other people would have thought the same thing, and how can we make it, the connection between your idea and to the one that is giving us the answer that we want. So that's a great point. So with respect to innate motivation, your brightest students may avoid challenges, may dislike having to put forth effort because it's always been easy for them. So when it is difficult, they just collapse. They just can't handle it. They have anxiety. Whereas your students who perhaps may not be your honors college students or your really gifted students may be really forward-thinking go-getters, really like that challenge and really put forth the effort through the semester. You can see that growth in them through the semester, and that's because of that intrinsic motivation. And as I mentioned, it can require that external encouragement from you by giving them some motivations in class, things that you say, things that they do, which I'll show you some examples of in a second. Okay. We talked about these three kind of different areas of what is affecting their engagement, their motivation, their apathy. We talked about themselves, the course, their academia, and the environment. And it's absolutely a combination of these factors. It depends on the individual, their experiences and situation. But there's another key category that's missing from this list. And a couple of y'all touched on it, but I hadn't seen it yet. And what is another thing that will encourage engagement, motivation, reduce apathy in your class that's not listed here? A big category. Yes, thank you, professors, us, you, instructors, TAs, absolutely. It is you. Yes, pedagogy. It is your instructional choices of what you do in the classroom in that learning setting that will help to encourage engagement and motivation and reduce that apathy. So how we teach what we do. So what this means is that in this moment of having digital natives going into Gen P, how do we change what we do? How do we change what we teach? And so you want to think about in your classroom, in the activities that you do, is there connection between what research is telling us that works in the classroom, and are you actually doing it in your class? And I'm going to talk about those different aspects of what to do in the class in just a second. So you want to really kind of keep that in the back of your mind and think about what I'm doing in class. Is this encouraging engagement or not? Getting student attention is a necessary first step. We cannot assume that we're going to come into class with the attention, forefront and ready. You need to do that initial, all right, let's get your attention, let's do this, let's move into this, let's do this activity. And there's no magic bullet. You need to use tools, multiple tools, ones that work for you, for your particular setting and context. They may need to be changed over time. No course should be static. You should always change with respect to your context, your students, your situation, new technology, new findings. And so you're going to hear a lot of ideas today. And so what I want you to think about, and we'll talk about this at the end, pick one, make a couple adjustments, make a small adjustment, see what happens, make changes, add another, change to another, all sorts of really cool ideas. And that's, teaching should absolutely not be static. It should always be changing and morphing and improving over time. So if you have to change something, that's great, because you then recognize this is not working. I see this, let's do something different. So how all this motivation, comments, research tells us what it tells us about what we need to be doing with our instruction, what choices we need to make. There are these 5 general categories that research has shown as important to encouraging student engagement and motivation. So we're going to go through each of these in turn, but basically enthusiasm, relationship with your students, student individuality, relevance, and then making the class engaging by what you're doing. So let's look at the very first one, role model. Being enthusiastic, showing what it looks like to be someone in your field. Students want to see that you love to teach what you're teaching, or you love to do the activities that you're doing, and encourage them to get involved in that particular field or discipline. So this comes from your voice and body language, how you move around the classroom. Really, truly, storytelling is an important type of pedagogy. How do you engage students into experiencing and thinking about and putting themselves into the moment in a particular field or content or context? Tell stories, because that really helps to engage their imagination and think about, oh, what would I have done in this situation, or what would it be like to go out to sea on a research cruise, things like that. So tell your stories. Your stories are experiences that they will not have had, that will help to perhaps not just motivate them, but inspire them to perhaps look into other things that they may not have thought they would be interested in. So you are this role model for why it's a joy to you to be in the field that you're in. Also important is content selection. This may seem obvious, but let me give you a little twist to this. You want to be sure that the content that you're presenting, be intentional in what you're presenting, thinking about, should I perhaps put this as a reading content or an outside activity or an outside little research project, and then in the classroom do activities where we apply it, where we see the relevance of it, where we work with the problem set. These are things that help them to be engaged with the material instead of just hearing an hour and 15 minutes where there isn't an opportunity for engagement. So really rethinking, how do I put together the material and the content in the classroom so that it is engaging and not being something that just makes them start looking at their phone, or, as y'all were saying, their eyes closing and falling asleep. It should be content that the students see as relevant to them, significant to them. And we'll talk more on this in a second as well. Why do they need to know this? And this is something that you should always think about with your activities that you do, your assessments. Think about, how can I make an assessment or an activity relate to what they will be seeing in their own life, in their future, or in a skill that they need to have for a future job? How can I craft it to help be more applicable to that, to engage them better? Keep students thinking about the subject. So at the beginning of class, perhaps emails, current events, have students bring in current events. I'm going to show you some examples of this in content. Make it so that they are engaging with the material outside the class and bringing it in as well. And have that as part of the assignment, having them get in groups, and one group brings material or another group brings material certain weeks, certain days of the week, whatever it might be. There's all sorts of options that you can do here. So here's some examples. This is what I do in my marine science class that I teach. I, of course, send emails, but I know that they don't always read emails. And so I connect with them and I remind them of things, which I'll talk about in a second, but I also use GroupMe as an engagement tool. So this is some examples from last semester, this semester. This was Monday at 6:40 p.m. A student posted on GroupMe, there was an earthquake in Charleston. Of course, I'm like, oh my God, cool. Recently, we had Hurricane Lee coming through. As I said, I teach marine science. We haven't even gotten to hurricanes yet. And the students I have been talking about, Idalia that was coming through. And so Lee was coming through, and it's a massive hurricane. And so he was like, are there good resources to track? I remember you talking about it. So I gave him that rapid communication, quick text to them, talking about what's happening. Don't worry about it, those types of things. But that is helping them to engage outside of classroom, and that interest is then brought in the next class as well. Here's another one. A student actually posted this. We were talking about waves and geology and how geology impacts the size of waves. And he brought up this story that I had heard about. I didn't mention at the time, and he posted a video on it. And this was outside of class. And then I do reminders of things that might be coming up that might be of interest outside of class. So this is one way that you can do that really helps to keep that engagement, encourage that, but then show that enthusiasm. This is why I love what I do to your students, and that helps to encourage that motivation, reduce that apathy. Now, connected to this, a really, really huge area of what research shows is important is that relationship you develop with your students. Make that connection. Research shows a significant connection between students' motivation in class and what the quality is of that relationship that you develop with your class, with your students. The better that quality, the deeper that quality, the more connection you have, the more interested and motivated and engaged your students are. If students know that you care about them, care about their success, want to hear what's going on, value what they have to say about certain topics, bringing their experiences into class, much more motivating to come to that class than otherwise. And again, research shows that. I think that students, when they know that they're coming to a class where they can just relax, be themselves, ask funny questions, ask stupid questions, and not be, laughed at, or feel that it is a sense of safety and community, that is the class they want to come to every day. And that's the class that they are more motivated and engaged in. And that's the class that you want to encourage with what you're doing in class, how you engage the students themselves. It allows them to be and feel safer and be more likely to take those risks, ask those questions. Students want instructors to have high expectations. Students who have those instructors that have those expectations want to and will put in that effort to succeed. There was a book that came out last year. It's called Keeping Us Engaged, and it's a book that actually has stories written by students of what has worked for them, what made them engaged, motivated in a classroom. And all of these things that I'm talking about here are talked about in these anecdotes and stories from students. It's a great, great, great book. So an example that I do on the first exam, students did such a great job. I teach an honors class, so I know I have a bigger privilege than others, but they all made a very mid-90s average on the first exam. And these are non-majors. And so I was so thrilled about it. On Etsy, there's a woman that does stickers, and she had this awesome "You Rock" sticker. So I ordered a bunch and gave it to everyone when I handed back the first exam. So what they then did was, as soon as I handed it out, they started taking that little vinyl sticker, putting it on their water bottles, putting it on their computers. And that warmed my heart, because they saw that I really do feel that way about them, and they should be proud of what they did. And that really helps to develop that positive relationship with your students. So the other thing to think about is, what kind of relationship do you have with your least motivated students? And then think about, what can I do to change that and encourage the motivation in that student or in those students? And that will really help you to not only improve it for them, but for the entire class as well. What can I do for that student? So here's some examples of what you can do. There's verbal cues. So, hey, this is really neat. I haven't seen anything like this before. Who's up for a challenge? I think you'll find this next work really interesting. Or say, as you read through, ask yourself, what would be the next step that I would do? What's the next logical step? So things that you can even just say in class to encourage students to be more motivated. Keeping them on track helps with motivation. I always do what I call a housekeeping slide, where I talk about what's coming up, and I remind them of this in the group me as well. But that non-email communication, I think, has gotten to be really important. They prefer that easy, short, quick text, where in GroupMe, because it's an app, it just pops up on their phone as a text. They don't have to log into Blackboard or log into Outlook to read the email. It's instantaneous and it's on their mind, and that's how they think. So there's all sorts of different ways you can do that, GroupMe, but there's a lot of other options as well. Recognizing student individuality, very important. Students are bringing experiences you have never had, perspectives you have never had, unique life stories, knowledge and skills. Engage that in the classroom. So have that environment that makes it very positive for them, comfortable for them to open up, to talk about those types of things, encouraging their questions, so that they see that they are valued as a member of this community. They will then want to share with their colleagues, with yourself, and ways to do that obviously is learning their names. I know that it can be hard with 200 plus students. I've had to do that myself, but just finding out what their experiences are. When I do my marine science class, I always ask them as an intro, this is about me type of index card. What is your experience with the marine science realm? Let me know whether or not you do have any, what stories that you might be able to share. And that really helps them to see that they have something that they can contribute to the classroom. Relevance, so big, so important. Why should they care? Why is it important for them? And what are you doing in the classroom to make that content relevant to their lives? Why do they need to know this? How is it relevant? How it has applied to your life? What do they want to learn? And I think it's important to talk about that with not just respect to the content, but the assignments that you're doing. I'm having you do this assignment because this, and this, because you will see it like this in the real world or in your particular type of job. Make it relevant. If it's not relevant, if it's not something that they will see in another way in another class, think about how you can change it to make it so. So help them find that personal meaning, that value, that connection. I have my students do projects and I tell them to choose from a list of about 27 controversial marine science and societal issues. They get to choose their topic because it's the one that they're interested in. It's not something that they aren't. So they are more engaged with it, more motivated to do well on that project. And reframe those tasks, that material, as why I'm doing this is to help you learn these tasks, help you learn this material. So when you see it in your 400 level class, you will already have learned it and will make it easier for you in that class. So really think about how you can reframe what you're talking about, what you're doing in class. So here's some examples. Relevance, when of course marine science, there's always something going on. So hurricanes coming through. I talk about this with Sandy, when Sandy hit, what it looked like in New York City, New Jersey. Also verbal cues that you can do. You know, you've asked me about X, well, let's find out why this actually happened this way. Or as you work through this, you'll see why it's important to know how to do this. Or this is something you're going to use again and again. You're going to see this again and again. This is a massive, major area of research in this field. This is a major model that you see over and over again. When you try this, you'll see whether you actually got yesterday's content or not. And I really love this one. So instead of saying to the students, this is how you get a good grade, say instead, this is how you can change someone's mind, especially if you're in a history class or an English class or a political science class. I think that's a really cool cue you can use. And then making class engaging. So let me ask you, which would you rather attend, a streamed or live concert, a live musical or adaptation, or a football, baseball game at a stadium, or watch it on TV? Of those pairs, which one is the more engaging one to attend? The live ones. Yes, the in-person ones. And why? Why is that? Interaction. Yes. You are part of the experience. Yes, all your senses are being engaged. This is the difference between these, is that the energy that's there, there's a connection, there's community, they're getting instant feedback from others around them. That passion is seen in everyone around them. There's emotional buy-in. So making that your class the same way as thinking about how can this be different from them watching a video. If they were watching a YouTube video, what's the point? That's the difference between a YouTube video and your class. Make your class engaging. So making more variety available in your classroom. Emphasize interactive activities, and we'll show you some examples in just a second. Engaging experiences, this gets the students thinking, active with it. Making sure that that class time with you and their classmates is more valuable use of their time than just reading content or watching a video. So some ways you can do that is flipping the classroom. That was mentioned earlier, where you have them watch a video, but then the question was, how do you make sure they watch a video? Well, the activities you do, they can't do without having watched the video. active learning techniques, interactive techniques. Let me show you some examples of these. Here's interactive variety. I'm a mean person, so this is one way I engage and make it an engaging class, because these are all relevant to the topic that I teach about with respect to marine science, hurricanes, Pangea, water, polarity. But also how you put things in slides, it can also be engaging. So not static slides, have color changes, highlight the words, make it so that it's something that's visibly easier to remember than just a whole bunch of text on bullets listed up there more than what's up here. Getting students to talk, discussions are huge. Discussions don't have to be necessarily just about the class content, but can lead into it. So for example, have a list where you ask students, here's a list that was given, how would you maybe change this, add to it, remove from it? If it's a ranking, how would you change the ranking? Here's some great examples. Nursing, the 5 things that all nurses need to know, the 17 things I believe in business, 100 years, 100 novels. There's all sorts of ways we're getting students to talk based on things that will interest them and engage them is a way to start that energy and that synergy in the classroom. There was one I came across that I thought was really cool, doing sticky for really large classes, having sticky participation points. So using sticky notes, you if a student participates, answers a question, asks a question, you give them a sticky note, they put their name on it, and they all turn it in at the end of the class, and they get participation points for it. It's easy for you to keep track of it. They get excited because they've been given a sticky note, yay, because they participated, and the person that talked about this, they said that they really got a huge increase in engagement and interaction as a result of that. And it doesn't have to be a large pointed part of the grade. It can be a small percentage, but they're still being engaged and motivated to get those sticky notes, is what the guy said, the professor said. Here's another example of something different. Instead of me talking about marine science and boring marine science history, I had them find what they thought was cool. Persons or peoples related to the development of marine science as a field, discoveries that had an impact, major technologies. They then put what they found into a Padlet page, and we could see what others thought was interesting with what they came across with respect to marine science history and technology. So that was a really cool assignment that I did. Quiz resources, there's a whole bunch of them out there. Use them. The ones that I've come across that I like is Mentimeter and Poll Everywhere. This helps to do review of content that they just heard about or learned about. I'm not going to go into active learning because this is not what this workshop is about, but there are a whole bunch of resources out there that y'all have access to that can help you find activities that work with respect to applying active learning in the classroom. The one I really liked that I wanted to show you was this one, where it actually allows you to choose what your context is. How big is my class? How big are the activity groups? How much time do I have? What space do I have? What year? And what it does is, as you go through and winnow down what your context is, it gives you good active learning strategies to use in your particular context. So that's a really cool application for that. I appreciate y'all being here today. I hope you got some good ideas. Thanks to everyone.